Hello and welcome to Apologetical. I wanted to make a video on the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I've been hearing so much about this Orlando shooting that I thought that I should respond to that a little bit too, especially since I've been taking so much heat for it from both Muslim friends and the LGBT crowd. Those are actually the two debates I've done. I've done two debates, two public moderated debates, one with a gay pastor over gay Christianity and the other with Wael Ibrahim over Islam and what did Jesus claim to be God historically. So since this was in the news where a Muslim jihadist, and again, not all Muslims are like that, of course, but it was a Muslim that killed 50 or so people at a gay nightclub and also wounded the same number of people, that those two worlds kind of came together, and that's been an interesting experience. If I try to, those seem like two completely different people that I've debated. One a conservative Sunni Muslim, and the other a gay and atheist pastor. So I thought, let's think about everything they've ever said. What do they have in common? The only thing that I could think of that they have in common is that all three of us would say that pornography is dangerous. All three of us have said that at some point or another. But actually, it's only the Christian worldview that really has a firm foundation for that. Wael Ibrahim has been great to recognize that pornography is a great danger and almost universal temptation for men, but you almost need the words of Jesus to actually have a reason to be worried about it, because if you compare Islam and Christianity, Islam has a lower standard sexually. Divorce, not that big a deal. Lust of the heart, not the greatest problem, relatively. But if you look at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 and see how Jesus applies the law of Torah to our heart, that just that desire in the heart is equally as dangerous in front of a holy God as adultery, then we have a reason to fight pornography. And worldview does matter, and that's what led to the shooting. And worldview does matter. Actually, if I think about some of the intersections of these two things, one of the things in the gay Christianity debate that we debated was the story of Lot and homosexuality in Genesis 18. Now, in the debate, I said that in Genesis 13, there's foreshadowing that there's wickedness in Sodom and Gomorrah, and then when you get to chapter 18, you see what the wickedness is, namely that they said, we want to have sex with these men, and then Abraham says, oh, that is wicked. So, of course, there's a constellation of sins, there's also gang rape, but it's not appropriate or historically accurate for the so-called gay Christian movement to say that this is not about homosexuality, this is only about rape. It's about both. And you could actually see the same thing from Islam, too, because it's a relatively ancient religion. Let's look at the Hadith, let's look at the words of Muhammad. Because, now, the author of the Quran had a very poor knowledge of the Bible, but he got the basic gist of many of the stories, and this was one of them. He said, if you find anyone doing as Lot's people did, kill the ones who did it, and the one to whom it is done. And you see this language in the Hadith from the Prophet of Islam, and it defines the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah as homosexuality, and it uses this language. It's a euphemism for homosex activity. And that's just in line with everything in the ancient world, and not just the 7th century, but all the centuries before it, that in church history and in Islamic history as well, that these interpreters realized that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was actually homosexuality. So it's not just an exegetical support for the conservative position in Genesis 18, but also historical support for it as well. And although actually that gay pastor saw me talking with Wael Ibrahim on Facebook, and that gay pastor made some comments from redactional criticism to put his 2 cents in about why he also has doubts about the authorship of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And it was actually a better argument than Will had, because Will's opening presentation was just trying to pretend, or just trying to make the inaccurate assertion that Jesus is never God in the Bible, and that's just not the case. So the whole opening statement had low value in the conversation. This gay pastor took more of a Shabir Ali approach with redactional criticism. But one of the things I said is that if a Muslim were to use these good arguments that Daniel made, well, not good, but much better, that he would have to throw away everything he believes. Because if you take the standard of redactional criticism, then if you use that standard fairly, you have to toss out everything in the Muslim faith. You can't trust the Hadiths anymore, and you also cannot trust the Quran. And you certainly, if these people that these redactional scholars, they would not trust as historical anything the Quran says about Jesus. Nothing at all. Just some of that interesting intersection of these two things. With this actual killing, I really like what Dr. Moeller said, that it's an assault on the image of God. And that's why we grieve. I like this picture here of the faces, because those people who died are people, and that's sad. Now maybe Muslim jihadists have been doing so much murder that I'm starting to get desensitized to that, but part of that desensitization is my fault. If I had more of God's heart, I would grieve even more that these people whose faces I'm looking at right now are not even alive anymore, and that's sad. And it's not only sad, but Christians know why it's sad, because God, not just that God made them, but He made them with His image, and this God that we revere, that it's an assault on that when we murder. Even if these people aren't Christians, they bear the image of God, and we respect and honor the humanity of every single person, period. And that's why when we have basically haters like Steven Anderson and even Pat Robertson that kind of express joy over this event, that's you even wonder if they have the gospel at all. If anything, it's not representational of gospel. If you're ever happy that somebody dies, like Ezekiel 18, it shows that God is not, that He grieves over this kind of thing. He does not desire that this would happen to people. Some have been using "weep with those who weep" and "laugh with those who laugh," "mourn with those who mourn" in Romans, and it's kind of taking it out of context, because the context there is about Christians. With Christian brothers, we weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn, because sometimes the world is completely off base. Sometimes the world celebrates things that we do not celebrate, but it's kind of okay to take that verse out of context, because we should care. We should care about something so terrible as this, and really I wish that I had a greater heart for this senseless tragedy. And that's what it is. It's a senseless tragedy. Ironically, the day before this attack, I mentioned that the leader of ISIS actually has a PhD in Islamic studies. So who am I to say that a guy with a PhD in Islamic studies is not a Muslim? Of course, I also said that, because I want to be fair, that is not all of Islam. I want to listen to people. I want to make distinctions. If someone says, I'm not on Team ISIS, that's not me, then I'm going to let them not be on his team. Because I'm not on Westboro Baptist's team, I'm not on the KKK's team, so I'm also going to listen to the many, many Muslims that do not accept this. And by the way, if you have this Islamic system, you're supposed to put, even if you think that you should execute homosexuals, then you would have a trial, not a lone wolf killing. So it is really sad that this happened. So I made distinctions that this is not all of Islam. It's not even most of Islam. But it seems like the guy has a PhD in Islamic studies, that they have scripture and hadith and Quran to back it up. The KKK, you can't really back that up with the Bible. It's extreme Jesus does not lead to KKK, but there's an ambiguity in the Islamic sources such that it could go either way. And I'm so thankful for the great number of Muslims that do not go that way. So I recognize that Muslim friends that are saddened over this with me, thank you for your religion that is nothing like this. But it seems like these killers are also Muslims too. At least he identified as one. And that's what was so interesting. Although since I said that the day before these attacks, a Muslim friend said that I was like ISIS. I don't know why. I still don't understand even what that means, but I'm like ISIS for listening to these people that say they are Muslims. Even though I wanted to also say that, oh, you're not like that. That didn't matter. He said I was like ISIS. But right after the attack, I got a lot of heat from both of these worlds, from both the LGBT crowd and also from some Muslim friends saying that surely this guy is not religious, because there's some reports that he also struggled with homosexuality in his life. And I don't see why those need to be mutually exclusive. Furthermore, he said Allahu Akbar while he was doing it. His social media was full of pro-jihadi stuff, full of pro-ISIS stuff, his own words. Short story, he claimed to be religious. So I think that if you need to look at a guy that's yelling Allahu Akbar and say that he's not a Muslim, I think that there's a hole in your worldview if you need to say that this Muslim guy isn't a Muslim. Even if you think it's not the best way to be a Muslim, you should recognize that he thought that he was, if anything. I had both Muslims and LGBT crowd, both of them saying that he wasn't religious in any way. But why would that be? Why would a closeted homosexual be the thing is that my LGBT friends have been telling me that, oh, LGBT people can be religious too, and that's been so much of the debate. It's ironic that this time these same people are now suddenly telling me he has this homosexuality in his past, therefore he's not religious. So now you're telling me that people that have these kind of desires don't believe in God ever? That's the opposite of everything you've been telling me. But how could that be? It's an easy question to answer, because let's talk about forgiveness and the certainty of forgiveness. When you feel bad about your sins, whether it's homosexuality or anything else in the world, in Christianity there is certainty in forgiveness from believing in the cross and repentance. That it's, the word is propitiation. That my punishment, that is a just punishment, that because in Christianity God cannot arbitrarily ignore evil. If a human judge lets a murderer go because he feels like it, he would be an evil judge. But that punishment did go to Jesus on the cross. But there's no gospel in Islam, and if you are worried about a judgment in Islam, you have, frankly, an arbitrary judge who may send a pretty good guy to hell and may send a not so great guy to heaven. What is written will overtake them, and it might be an unexpected judgment. But in these threads of Islam, and I'm not saying it's the only Islam again. If you reject this, thank you, and I still recognize you as a great Muslim, that relatively great Muslim that rejects this with me. But in these violent threads of Islam, you can have a certainty of forgiveness if you do jihad. And now they might have a different definition of jihad, but that's their definition. And so if they're worried about judgment, then it would make perfect sense for him to do this. If he realizes, oh no, I've done these things in the past, I can fix it by killing these people that led me into this sin. And especially, really, if you follow the ISIS logic, and this guy did, he was pro-ISIS, then every American who's a taxpayer to the American government that does these things, then every American taxpayer has a death penalty on their head. But if you have a homosexual, then they have 2 or 3 death penalties. So if you're going to do a jihad, well, why not go after the crowd that has multiple death penalties? So that's the theology behind that. But, and again, I always want to remember that God is sovereign. Dr. James White talked about the example that because when there's tragedy, we have a desire to, God had nothing to do with this, but God is the king of history, even with the free will of evil men. The cross was the most evil thing that happened, and God punished Judas is the son of perdition. He punished his evil, yet the cross was his plan. Dr. James White has recently used the example of the Assyrians and Babylonians, super evil empires at least, or maybe more evil than ISIS, but God used them to judge his own people, and then he judged the people he used to judge them with. That he was sovereign over the free wills of evil empires. And that, so it's biblically, we don't want to say that God has no purpose behind anything that ever happens, because God actually has a purpose in all things, even if we don't know it. But I don't need to go out on a limb and call these shootings any kind of judgment of God, because the desires are already a judgment of God. In Romans 1, there's a suppression of the knowledge of God, a universal one. I'm convicted of my own sin whenever I see this, that the evil desires in my heart show that, I hate my God. The sin that's left in my heart hates God. But the judgment in Romans 1 is just being let go, being turned over to your own evil desires. So if you have, whether a straight club or a gay club, if you have a room full of people who are pursuing these desires, that just being let go into these desires is itself a judgment of God. So I have no need to call the shootings themselves the judgment of God. Just the degree to which we pursue these evil desires is a terrifying indictment and judgment already in and of itself. But the good news behind that is that God is sovereign, and we actually do serve a God that will take all things and work them together for his good. And we do have a God that cares. He grieves more than we do. And those aren't mutually exclusive if you follow the Bible. If we follow the Bible, God has a purpose, even in great tragedies, but he also cares more than we could realize, more than we imagine. And we want to believe both of those things, both that our God is the king of history and that he loves all people.